A biker stops a group of bullies tormenting a quiet boy in a small town, only to find out the child's father is the local police chief. The dealer's son who led the bullying tries to twist the truth, using his family's power to strike back. But when revenge turns personal, both the biker and the chief decide to draw the line and stand for what's right. Just wait until you see how justice found its voice in Cedar Ridge and how one act of courage changed the whole town. The March wind bit through Cedar Ridge like it had a score to settle. Jack Rourke sat astride his Harley at the red light in front of Whitman's auto, watching the afternoon sun bounce off chrome and car hoods. The air smelled of gasoline, rubber, and the small-town pride that usually hides behind loud engines. It was the kind of place where boys learn swagger before kindness. Then he heard it. A jagged, wet kind of laughter, too cruel for daylight, too practiced to be new. It came from the alley behind the dumpster, where good kids don't go unless they've run out of options. Jack's neck tensed before he even saw the source. He turned off the clutch and rolled forward slowly. The laughter sharpened. Then he saw them. A skinny boy stood cornered against a brick wall, his backpack ripped open, papers floating in a puddle like tiny white flags. 3 boys in varsity jackets circled him. Their sneakers scuffed the concrete, a rhythm of dominance. The tallest, Cole Whitman, the dealership owner's son, twirled a house key around his finger, tapping it against the smaller boy's ribs with deliberate control. The move was casual, almost lazy, but it made the victim flinch each time. Jack's gut twisted. He'd seen that scene before, years ago, when he'd been the one pressed against a locker instead of a wall. Back then, no one stepped in. He swore he'd never make that mistake again. He killed the engine. Silence hit like a slammed door. The 3 boys turned, surprise briefly softening their bravado. "Afternoon," Jack said evenly, his voice deep enough to make the words carry. He swung a leg off the Harley, boots scraping the pavement. "You boys picking on someone smaller, or am I reading this wrong?" Cole smirked, a practice performance inherited from someone who owned too much of the town. "Mind your business, old man." Jack took one slow step forward, just one. The smallest boy's grin faltered first. He muttered something under his breath and backed away. The second followed, murmuring, "Come on, dude." Cole stayed longer. He had to. Sons of powerful men always do. His jaw clenched, trying to hold on to the reputation that his father's last name had bought him. But when Jack met his eyes, calm, unwavering, tired of empty power, something cracked. Cole's bravado leaked out like air from a slashed tire. "This isn't over," he muttered, his sneakers slapping the ground as he jogged off, shoelaces dragging behind him like a tripped ego. The alley quieted. The only sound left was the soft drip of water from the gutter and the boy's trembling breath. Jack crouched, gathering the scattered notebooks and crumpled worksheets. He brushed off the dirt and glanced up. "You heard?" The boy shook his head quickly, though his lip trembled. "No, I'm okay." Jack nodded. "Name's Jack." "Liam," the boy whispered. "All right, Liam." Jack handed him a few damp pages, the pencil writing bleeding at the edges. "Let's get you out of here. You hungry?" Liam hesitated, as if unsure whether the offer was real. Then he nodded. Jack picked up the torn backpack, secured it with a bungee cord to the back of his Harley, and handed the boy his spare helmet. "Ever been on a bike before?" Liam shook his head, eyes wide. "First time for everything," Jack said gently. "Hold on light, not tight. You'll be fine." When the engine rumbled to light, the boy flinched, then steadied. As they pulled out onto the side road, the wind caught the last of his fear and scattered it. Jack took the long route, away from traffic lights and questions, down the quiet back streets where trees still carry traces of winter. Liam's hands rested lightly on Jack's worn leather jacket, careful, almost reverent, not clinging but trusting, like he was holding on to a story that didn't belong to him yet, but someday might. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt something he hadn't since before the mistakes, before the uniform, before the noise. Purpose. The road to May's diner stretched like a ribbon of old asphalt, cracked and glinting under the late afternoon sun. The Harley hummed low beneath him, its steady vibration cutting through the leftover nerves in the boy's shaking hands. Jack didn't talk much on rides. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the noise of the wind did a better job than words ever could. They pulled up outside the diner, a squat brick building with fading teal paint and a neon sign that still buzzed even when it wasn't supposed to. Jack parked the bike under the shadow of a flickering street lamp. Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee, fried hope, and pie, the kind that forgave a long day if you let it. Liam slid into a booth by the window. His shoulders were still drawn up, like he was waiting for another shove that wouldn't come. He ate small bites of apple pie as if he were afraid to owe it something. Jack let the silence stay. It was an honest silence, the kind that allowed people to breathe. After a while, he spoke. Why them? The question wasn't sharp, more like curiosity softened by experience. Liam stared out the window at the parking lot where the sky had begun to blush orange. Cole's brother got arrested last month, he murmured. DUI, lost his scholarship. People say it's my dad's fault. Jack frowned. Your dad's fault? Why's that? Liam hesitated. His fingers tightened around the fork. Doesn't matter. Jack studied him for a second. It did matter, but pushing wouldn't help. He knew the look, a kid caught between anger and loyalty. So instead of questions, Jack offered something simpler. Here, he said, pulling a small pair of pliers from his jacket pocket. See that zipper? It's busted. If you push the teeth together and twist this way, he demonstrated slowly, letting Liam finish the move. The boy followed, careful and intent. Sometimes fixing things is just patience and leverage. A small smile flickered across Liam's face, the kind that comes from doing something right for the first time in a while. Jack grinned back. And when you tell someone no, he added, keep your shoulders straight, makes the word look heavier. They sat there for a few minutes more, two people at different ends of the same road, sharing pie and silence. Then Jack stood, pulled a pen from the counter, and scribbled his number across Liam's palm. The pen almost ran out halfway, fighting to stay useful. If they corner you again, you call me, Jack said, or someone at school, or both. Just don't try to handle it alone, all right? Liam nodded, his eyes catching the light. There was something in his expression, surprise mixed with gratitude, the kind you feel when kindness shows up where you never expect it. Outside, the evening settled into that soft gray between day and night. Jack handed him the spare helmet again, adjusted the strap under his chin, and said quietly, let's get you home. They took the long way back. Street lamps blinked to light one by one, their halos stretching across the road. The town rolled past, old houses with porches, laundry lines, the distant sound of a train. For a while, it felt like peace. When they finally turned onto a narrow tree-lined street, Jack eased the Harley to a stop in front of a weathered craftsman house. The yard was neat, the kind of place built on order in early mornings. Before Jack could say a word, the porch light flicked on. A man stepped out, tall, iron-gray hair, a posture that didn't need introduction. His voice carried the calm weight of someone used to giving orders. Son, you okay? Yeah, Liam said quickly. Jack helped me. The man's eyes moved from his son to Jack, measuring everything, the bike, the jacket, the scars the world leaves behind. His expression didn't change, but his gaze said he'd already filed Jack under trouble worth investigating. Thank you, he said finally, the words neat and polished. Then, automatically, name. Jack Rourke. Something shifted. The man's jaw tightened just enough to make Jack feel the space between them widen. The porch light painted the scene like an interrogation room without walls. After a beat, the man extended a hand that was both courteous and controlled. Daniel, he said, Chief of Police. The title hit harder than any punch. Jack's stomach dropped a notch. He could almost feel old paperwork whispering behind him, the record, the tickets, the time he'd rather forget. Under that porch light, his leather jacket suddenly felt like armor in a place that didn't welcome soldiers. Chief Hayes' eyes flicked briefly to the bike, then back to Jack. "I appreciate what you did for my son," he said carefully, "but I'll take it from here." Jack nodded, reading the message hidden between the lines. "Thank you, but stay in your lane." He could respect that, even if it stung. He turned to Liam, forced a small grin, and gave a mock salute, an old Marine habit dressed up as humor. Liam smiled back, just for a second, before his father's shadow reclaimed the porch. Then Jack started the Harley. The engine's low growl filled the quiet street, echoing off the houses. As he pulled away, the porch light faded in his mirrors, one man framed by duty, another riding off toward the dark, both carrying more weight than they could show. By morning, Cedar Ridge had done what small towns do best, rewritten the story until the truth sounded inconvenient. At Vic's garage, where Jack worked part-time tuning engines and fixing what other people broke, the whispers came first with laughter. Someone swore he'd roughed up 3 high schoolers half his size. Someone else added that he'd scared one of them into tears. At May's diner, the story flipped again. This time, the biker had terrified Liam so badly the poor kid could hardly speak. It was the kind of rumor that grew legs faster than any Harley. By noon, half the town had picked a side, and the other half just enjoyed the noise. Jack didn't bother to defend himself. He'd learned a long time ago that in places like Cedar Ridge, stories didn't need to be true. They just needed to sound possible. He was wiping grease off his hands when a black and white patrol car pulled up outside. 2 officers stepped out. Their posture was polite, but their eyes gave away the errand. "Rourke," the taller one said, shifting awkwardly. "Chief wants a word." Jack glanced at the clock, 11:32 a.m., and exhaled through his nose. "Guess I'm free." The Cedar Ridge police station was smaller than he expected. The walls hummed faintly from old fluorescent lights, and everything smelled faintly of paper, disinfectant, and coffee that had given up hours ago. Chief Daniel Hayes' office looked nothing like what Jack imagined a police chief's office would. No framed arrests, no certificates meant to impress visitors. Just a single photo of a Little League team in mismatched uniforms and a folded American flag behind glass. The kind of quiet memorial that said enough without words. Hayes gestured toward the chair across his desk. "Sit down." Jack did. "We've got a complaint," Hayes began. His voice was steady, but not cold. "Cole Whitman's father says you assaulted his son." Jack let out a dry laugh. "Assaulted? Chief, I told him to leave the kid alone. That's it." Hayes didn't react, which told Jack more than any words could. The man had already done his homework. Probably checked the cameras, talked to Liam, maybe even called the school. This wasn't a trap. It was a test. "Liam confirmed your story," Hayes said finally, "but Whitman's pushing it. He's on the town council's budget committee, has friends in places that make paperwork move slower or faster, depending on who's asking." Jack's jaw tightened. There it was, the quiet machinery of small-town politics, humming beneath everything. A man's truth could be spotless, but if someone wealthier didn't like it, the stain would appear anyway. "Chief," Jack said slowly, forcing his voice to stay even, "you gonna let him throw that weight around because I look like a headline he can afford?" For the first time, Hayes looked up from his desk. His eyes flickered. Not anger, not guilt, but something heavier. A father's calculus. A man caught between his badge and his home address. "No," he said after a long pause, "but I have to do this by the book, for you and for Liam." Jack nodded once. He respected that, maybe more than he wanted to. Hayes called in a patrol officer and sent him to pull footage from the gas station camera across the street from the dealership. Meanwhile, Jack waited in the hallway on a plastic chair that had seen too many confessions and not enough apologies. The hours stretched thin. Every sound, the printer, the ringing phone, the shuffle of boots, felt louder than it should. Jack leaned back and caught his reflection in the glass door. He looked calm, but inside, the old version of himself, the soldier who didn't wait for orders, was pacing, restless. When the officer finally returned, he was holding a USB drive and a cautious smile. "Got something." The video was grainy, the colors faded by the afternoon sun, but it was enough. 3 boys in varsity jackets, one smaller kid cornered by a wall, and one man, Jack, standing by talking with both hands visible. Hayes nodded slowly as he clicked through the frames. The truth was quiet, but undeniable. He pressed the intercom. "Bring in Whitman." Moments later, Robert Whitman, owner of the local dealership, entered the room. His suit was sharp enough to suggest money, his tone sharp enough to suggest he was used to being obeyed. "When your boy assaults my kid with a motorized thug and you people do nothing." Hayes didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply turned the monitor around, letting the still frame speak. "Your son and his friends committed misdemeanor harassment and destruction of property. You can accept a restorative agreement or we'll file charges. Those are your options." Whitman blinked, thrown off balance. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Hayes said calmly, "and you don't get to lie because you can afford it." For a few seconds, the room went still. Then Whitman swallowed his anger, like a man biting into something better. He signed the papers, muttering, "This isn't over." Jack stood quietly, watching. It wasn't triumph he felt, more like relief with a bruise underneath. When Whitman left, the silence returned. Hayes leaned back, the weight of leadership softening his shoulders. "Thank you," he said finally, his tone no longer official, "for helping my son. I had to be cautious last night, not because of you, but because of all this." He gestured vaguely around him, the station, the walls, the badge. "You try to do the right thing here, and there's always someone who wants to remind you what it costs." Jack nodded. He understood. "He's a good kid, Chief," he said quietly. "Teach him to square his shoulders when he says no." Hayes smiled then, a real smile, small but honest. "He said you told him that." For the first time that day, Jack allowed himself to exhale. The world hadn't changed, not really, but for one boy, and maybe 2 men, something had shifted just enough to matter. For a brief moment, it seemed like the storm had passed. The paperwork was done, the truth filed neatly between signatures and statements. Cedar Ridge had something it rarely managed, a story that ended the right way. But peace in small towns is a fragile thing. By the time the moon rose 2 nights later, that peace had already been traded for pride. Jack found out when he closed the garage for the night. The alley was quiet, smelling of oil and rain. He almost missed it, a soft hiss where silence should have been. One step closer, and his flashlight caught it. A clean, deliberate slash through the Harley's rear tire. The kind of cut that wasn't random. The kind made by someone sending a message. Jack stared at it for a long moment, the air around him heavy. He didn't need a detective to guess the family name behind it. Still, instead of kicking over trash cans or storming the Whitman house, he just breathed out slowly. Anger gave quick victories but long debts, and he was done owing anyone in this town. So he made the one call that could turn emotion into record: the police station. Officer Marin arrived 10 minutes later. She was young, the kind of young that still believed in the rules, but her eyes already carried the weight of lessons learned early. Her flashlight swept across the tire, the ground, the faint shoe prints half faded by drizzle. "Clean cut," she said. "Somebody knew what they were doing." Jack leaned against the brick wall, arms folded. "Somebody wanted me to know who they were." Marin looked up, studying him. "You made someone look small, Mr. Rourke. People like that always want their size back." Jack gave a short, humorless breath. "They can rent it," he said. That earned him the faintest smirk. She took photos, measured, filled out the report. No empty promises, no false comfort. Before leaving, she looked at him again. "I'll file it tonight," she said. "Don't expect miracles, but expect that it won't disappear." That was enough. The next afternoon, while sunlight settled in the garage dust, Liam appeared at the doorway, clutching the helmet Jack had once lent him. It looked oversized in his hands, like courage borrowed from someone else. "Dad says I can't ride with you," he blurted, before Jack could say a word. "But I wanted to say thanks, and I'm sorry about your bike." Jack set down the wrench he was holding, wiping his hands on a rag that would never be clean again. "Not your fault, kid." Liam's voice lowered, trembling only slightly. "Cole said it was," he whispered. "He said it was a warning." Jack froze. He looked at the boy, at the way his small shoulders squared up just enough to speak the truth in a town that preferred whispers to honesty. That took more courage than most grown men ever found. "You did right telling me," Jack said quietly. "Now you go home, okay? Let adults make adult messes." Liam nodded, relief flickering across his face, and left. The garage fell quiet again, except for the sound of a slow breath being exhaled through teeth that were tired of holding words back. That evening, headlights swept across the garage walls. Jack stepped out to see Chief Hayes, dressed not in his uniform but in jeans and a sweatshirt, the plain clothes of a man who'd decided which side of the rule book mattered tonight. He looked at the slashed tire, then up at Jack. "I can't prove it," he said, "but I can make it clear that the next line they cross will be the one they trip on." Jack nodded once. No words needed. They didn't take the patrol car. That would have made it official. Instead, they drove separately. Jack and Vic's loaner pickup, Hayes in an unmarked SUV. The road to the Whitman residence wound through quiet neighborhoods where porch lights burned like watchful eyes. The Whitman house sat on a hill, white columns, polished brick, and a porch that pretended to be old money. The lights were still on when Hayes knocked. Cole came to the door first, still wearing arrogance like a uniform. His expression was prepared, defensive, confident, the same smirk he'd used on the playground, just older now. Hayes's tone was calm, but the calm of a storm before the thunder. "Listen," he said, voice low and steady. "You don't have to like my son. You don't have to like him being my son. But you will leave him and Mr. Rourke alone." Cole shifted, ready to argue, but Hayes didn't pause. "If you so much breathe wrong in their direction, I will not be Chief Hayes having a polite talk with a councilman's kid. I will be the father of the boy you tried to break, and trust me, the law will be the least of what you'll answer to, because the truth will follow you, to your applications, your jobs, your dinner tables. Understand?" For the first time, Cole tried to put on his smirk, and it didn't fit. "Yes, sir," he said, the words forced but real. Hayes nodded once and turned away. The door closed behind them with the soft finality of something ending before it got worse. They stood on the sidewalk longer than needed. The night air carried that stillness that only comes after a line is drawn and held. Jack broke it first. "You didn't have to come." "I did," Hayes said, his breath visible in the streetlight glow. "Because I'm tired of this town teaching kids that power means never having to apologize." Jack looked at him, a man trying to carry both justice and fatherhood without dropping either. Something in his chest unclenched. "Me too." For a moment, they just stood there. Two men from opposite sides of the law sharing the same quiet ground. The night around them hummed low and steady, the kind of silence that comes not from fear, but from something finally set right. Spring arrived in Cedar Ridge the way forgiveness does, sudden, messy, and unstoppable. The air changed first. Pollen floated through the streets like confetti from a parade no one had planned, coating cars, porches, and tempers alike. The town shook off the cold, and with it some of its bitterness. People who'd whispered in diners now nodded at each other again. Not friends, maybe, but no longer enemies. At the high school, Liam Hayes started eating lunch with a new group, kids who didn't care what their fathers did for a living or whose names sat on a dealership sign. He laughed more easily now, his posture looser, his words steadier. When teachers mentioned his name, they no longer did it with sympathy, but with quiet respect. And Cole Whitman, once the center of noise, showed up at May's Diner one afternoon. The room went still the way it does when the air changes before rain. He stood by the counter, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes flicking toward Jack Rourke, who was nursing a cup of black coffee in the corner booth. "Sorry about the alley," Cole muttered, barely above the hum of the ceiling fan. It wasn't eloquent, and it wasn't enough, but it was a start. Jack gave a short nod, the kind that says, "Message received, debt recorded." Around them, the regulars pretended to stare at their pie, but everyone felt the shift. In Cedar Ridge, a public apology was rarer than a comet sighting, and just as worth noticing. The restorative meetings came next. Not courtrooms, not punishments, just hard chairs, awkward silences, and the truth spoken out loud. Cole and his friends repaired Liam's backpack, repainted a wall at the auto lot, and listened as people they'd hurt talked about the cost of small cruelties. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't graceful, but it worked. Character doesn't change in bursts. It grinds forward, one act at a time. Jack spent those months fixing what the winter and people had broken. He patched the Harley's tire himself, a quiet ritual of patience and redemption. Then, under the seat, he added a small blue line decal, curved into a circle. It was his private joke, a nod to rules and the people who carried them, sometimes too tightly, sometimes just right. When he rode through town now, he throttled down near the schools. He'd glance toward the playgrounds where laughter carried differently, lighter, freer, untouched by the sharp edges of fear. By May, Cedar Ridge had thawed completely. The police department hosted its annual Community Safety Day on the courthouse lawn. Booths lined the grass, local mechanics, first aid workshops, a wear your helmet station. Parents wandered with lemonade cups and too much sunscreen, the kind of day that seemed designed to make people forget they ever fought. Jack hadn't planned to go. He'd just been heading downtown for Bolts when the crowd pulled him in, the way small towns do when they decide you belong again. He found Liam first, stationed at a folding table covered in pamphlets about bike safety and rows of brightly colored helmets. The kid waved so hard the table shook. "Jack, over here!" Behind him stood Chief Hayes, though today he wasn't quite the chief. He'd traded the uniform for a navy polo and a sun visor, looking more like a neighbor than an authority figure. His stance was relaxed, his eyes softer than Jack had ever seen them. "Jack," Hayes said, smiling, and this time his tone carried no distance, only respect. "Got a minute?" Jack stepped closer, expecting a handshake or small talk. Instead, Hayes reached beneath the table and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a child-sized motorcycle jacket, faux leather gleaming in the sun. On the front, in neat stitching, was a single name, Liam. Jack blinked. "What's this?" Hayes looked half proud, half humbled. "We're starting a mentorship program, pairing veterans and tradespeople with students who could use something steadier than a lecture." He paused. "You were the pilot, Jack. You just didn't know it." For a long moment, Jack didn't speak. His thumb brushed over the stitched letters, tracing the edges where thread met fabric. He thought of that alley, the gravel, the sound of cruel laughter, the way it stopped when someone finally stood up. Then he pictured another morning, years ahead, where a different boy might find a stranger willing to do the same. He cleared his throat, his voice quieter than usual. "I can do Saturdays," he said. "Mornings are best." Liam's grin spread so wide it might have caught sunlight. Hayes smiled too, a man who finally saw proof that the world could bend the right way, even if just a little. The town exhaled that day, not in celebration, but in something gentler, understanding. Intrigue had started it all, when a biker stopped to see what others ignored. Shock had come under a porch light, where a badge and a leather jacket faced each other for the first time. Anger had burned in alleys and offices, testing what decency meant. And relief arrived not as fireworks, but as quiet action. A report filed, a rumor corrected, an apology made, a bridge rebuilt. No one turned into a saint. They didn't have to. The point wasn't perfection. It was effort. Because in Cedar Ridge, justice had stopped being a hammer. It had become a habit. On certain evenings, when the sky turned copper and the wind carried the smell of gasoline and spring dust, you could still hear the hum of Jack Rourke's Harley rolling down Main Street. At the light outside Whitman's auto, he'd always slow down, just enough to listen. No laughter came from behind the dumpsters anymore, just the faint sound of traffic and a boy's distant voice somewhere across town laughing without fear. Then the light would turn green. Jack would shift gears, lean into the road, and ride on, toward a Cedar Ridge still learning, slowly but surely, how to be the kind of place where a boy could grow up without learning to flinch.